All right. So in December of 1516, Thomas More published his famous book, a book known as Utopia. You've probably heard this term. It was originally composed in Latin and had a very long title. Its full title is Libellus vera aureus nec minus salutaris quam festivus de optima rei publicae statu deque nova insula Utopia. Some light reading, which means roughly a truly golden little book, no less beneficial than enjoyable, about the best state of government and the new island of Utopia. It was a fiction, and he gave his name, his fictional island, the name Utopia because in Greek, Utopia literally means no place. As in, there is no such place that is this perfect. A utopia, as we know in English, in modern English, is what we call like a perfect society. One where everything works the way it's supposed to, there's no injustice, everyone's happy, and so on and so forth. And even though this book that coined the term utopia is over 500 years old now, that idea is far, far older. It goes back, ancient Roman writers wrote things about this, ancient Greeks wrote about this. If you've ever heard of Plato's Republic, he talked about things like that. And it goes even further back than that. I would say it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. And why would I say that? Because it's from that very time, from the creation of man, all the way back at the Garden of Eden, that mankind has decided that he knows what's best for himself, that he can create the perfect society, that he can save himself. So I want to look at this tendency that mankind as a whole has, and subsequently each one of us has to admit that we all carry this within us. And we're going to see where this starts and how this theme develops in the Bible, and some historical examples all the way up to our own time. And I want us to see the conclusion from the very beginning, because it's stated in the very term that we use. Utopia means no place. Man cannot bring about perfection. We cannot do it. We will not do it. There will never be a perfect human society. There will never be a utopia that exists without God, and the only one that will exist is when God ushers in the new heavens and the new earth, as we read about in the final chapters of the book of Revelation. So I just want us to have that from the very beginning as we go through one step at a time. So let's go ahead and start in the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis and read about where this trend starts of mankind saying, no, God, I've got this. I know what to do. So if we look in Genesis chapter 3, we'll read Genesis 3, verses 1 through 6. It says, Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Has God indeed said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. And then the serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Knowing good and evil here means that they would be able to determine for themselves what was good and what was bad. You don't need God to tell you the right way to go. You don't need to listen to God, is what the serpent said. You'll be able to see it for yourself. You'll be able to determine for yourself. And so they did determine for themselves. They ate of the fruit. And so God had to expel them from the garden. And from that time on, we have indeed experienced good and evil down through history. But, we experience both good and evil, but we have a very terrible track record of being able to determine ahead of time whether something's a good idea or a bad idea. What leads to good versus what leads to evil. And it's this turning away from God to determining for ourselves what is right and wrong that plays out over and over again. You only have to turn, actually in my Bible it's literally on the same page. You go to the next example in Genesis chapter 4 with Adam and Eve's children. We'll read the first several verses of Genesis chapter 4. It says, "Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. And then she bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desires for you, but you should rule over it. And now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him." God, in essence, tells Cain the right way to go. He says, look, you could do things the right way. Don't take the lazy way. Control yourself, and you'll be just fine. But Cain decides that he knows, or, he wants a different way. No, I know it's better. I'll eliminate my competition. And so he kills Abel. And that just gets this snowball rolling. You have Adam and Eve who set the pattern, and you have Cain murdering Abel. And it's this pattern that picks up speed all down through history. And it gets so much momentum so quickly that just in Genesis chapter 6, it says that all of the men of the whole earth except for Noah was evil. There was only one person who was worth saving. That all the thoughts, specifically it says that the intent of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. All mankind except for Noah had chosen to forget God and to go their own way. And so again, we see some consequences. Adam and Eve turn away from God. They're thrown out of the garden. Cain murders Abel, and he is also exiled. Men turn away from God. God sends the flood and has to start over with Noah and his family. But even then, he starts over with the one righteous man and his family, and it takes no time at all, it seems, for them to say again, no, That's all right, God. We've got this. We can determine for ourselves. They're at it again. God tells them, be fruitful, multiply, spread across the face of the earth. And what do they do instead? It says they make a big city so that they can congregate together. This is in Genesis 11. Genesis 11, we'll read a few verses here. Genesis 11, 1 through 4. It says, Now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Okay, this looks nice. Let's settle down. Let's not go anywhere else. And they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. So come, let us go down. And they confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. They didn't want to spread out. They wanted to stay there. They didn't want to listen to God. What does it say? It says they wanted to make a name for themselves. We can determine what we're going to do. And they didn't want to stay down on the earth. They wanted to build a tower into the heavens. They wanted to ascend. They wanted to have the right, to sit on the throne. Maybe that sounds like someone else, someone who inspired this back in the first story we read in Genesis. So God, again, he has to humble them. He mixes up their speech. He scatters them. And I hope by now a clear pattern emerges. Man goes his own way. He tries to lift himself up. God pushes him back down and humbles him. And this repeats itself over and over again. If you look at the history of the people of Israel, if you go to the book of Judges, that is the story, a microcosm of this story, over and over again. This happens. You can read in Judges 2, verses 11 through 19. It gives us a nice little Cliff Notes version of the whole entire book. You read that and you got everything but the details. Judges 2, starting in verse 11. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they followed other gods from among the gods of the people, who were all around them, and they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtoreths, and the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. So he delivered them into the hands of plunderers, who despoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies all around them, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for calamity, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but they played the harlot with other gods and bowed down to them. They turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do so. And when the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge, for the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed them and harassed them. But it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers, by following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. And then the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, Because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and has not heeded my voice, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died. So it's this pattern. They depart to do their own thing, disaster. God saves them, they depart to do their own thing, and disaster. They rise up, they're brought down. They rise up, they're brought down. And that pattern continues from the judges into the time of the kings. And eventually, if you read all the way through the book of Kings and Chronicles, that the kingdoms of Israel and Judah do the exact same thing again until finally God has enough and Israel is led away to captivity first by the Assyrians, and then Judah is conquered and led into captivity by the Babylonians. But it doesn't stop there. It just keeps going. And we see that exact same pattern even among those who aren't God's people. Speaking of the Babylonians, if you want to turn with me over to the book of Daniel, chapter 4. And we'll read verses 30 to 33. Daniel 4, starting in verse 30. This is Nebuchadnezzar talking here. The king spoke, saying, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty?" So again, I have all the answers. I have all that I need. I'm going to build this perfect thing for myself, says Nebuchadnezzar. But continuing on in verse 31, while the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomever he chooses. So that very hour the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and ate grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. And Nebuchadnezzar thought that he had it all. He knew how to implement the plan. But God says, you have to know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. If we jump over to verse 25, it says, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Again, it's very similar. And so, let's just keep reading and see the conclusion. Verse 34, and at the end of the time, so 7 years later, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, what have you done? God humbled Nebuchadnezzar, and soon he humbled the whole nation of Babylon. But we need to hold on to that lesson there. That lesson that we read over and over here in verse 25, till you know that the Most High rules. And we saw in verse 33, in verse 32, until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. And in verse 35, all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will. All right, keep that in your mind, because we're going to be coming back to that. Like I mentioned, Babylon was then conquered by the Persians, who in turn they rose up and God humbled them as well, were conquered by the Greeks. Elsewhere in the book of Daniel, that is shown in prophecy to Daniel, that the Greeks would rise up, and that would be the downfall of the Persians. And even the downfall of of the Greeks was also foretold in Daniel chapter 8, which we won't read, but it talks about, the great one of the Greeks, which was Alexander. We know historically. Alexander rose up as the head of the Greeks. He was undefeated in battle, defeated the Persians, took all the territories from Greece, modern-day Turkey, Egypt, the Holy Land, all the Middle East, all the way clear into India. He was given the name the Great One, Alexander the Great, as we know him. He would later be seen as divine. He installed what we might call in modern-day English, Greek supremacy culture, where they spread Greek ways all across the Mediterranean and the Middle Eastern world, because they thought, again, just like the Babylonians before them, just like the Egyptians before them, going all the way back, that they had all the answers. This is the best way. If we just follow these, we'll be superior to all others. But he was cut off in his prime, a mysterious death. My guess is that they say his historiographers say that his last plan before he died was he wanted to turn west and go conquer Rome. Well, God had other plans for Rome, so Alexander didn't live to do that, because Rome would eventually conquer Greece, and God would use them, because that would include the area of Israel, and that's where the Messiah would be born. So again, God knows what he's doing, and all these men that come up in these kingdoms and they think they know how to do it best, God humbles them one after another in turn. And we see what it says in Daniel 4, that God rules in the kingdom of men. God knows best. And if we took the time, I'm sure, you could read all down through history and you could come up with example after example after example, if you knew where you were looking, of when the people rose up and they thought too highly of themselves, how God humbled them so that he could make way for someone else. I just want to look at a few, more modern examples, things that are in more recent memory. The first, if we go back not even 100 years to Hitler and the Third Reich, what was it supposed to be? 1,000 years of German supremacy. How many years did it actually last? 12. It lasted 12 years, and it ended with complete defeat and destruction and humiliation, not to mention the millions of lives lost. Also, what about the Soviet Union? They were supposed to usher in the communist utopia. They were the vanguard of the world working class. That lasted 70 years, and it probably cost 70 million lives or more before that all fell in ruin as well. And right now, we have, what do we have now going on? We have this new socialist, environmentalist meld going on, and they claim to have all the answers. They can save us from all forms of injustice and discrimination. We'll be saved from poverty. We'll be saved from the climate changing, and so on, because they know how to bring utopia. What do you think? Given the record, chances of that? Where do you see it going? Probably just like all the rest. Undoubtedly, just like all the rest. Big crash, up so high, humbled by God, rinse, repeat, over and over, just like we see throughout the history of mankind. And really, when we think about our own lives, can you see that pattern in your life? Especially, before you were baptized, maybe? I remember when I was in my early 20s, before I was baptized, there was a song out. It said something like, I'm not against what's right, I'm not for what's wrong. I'm just making my way and I'm gone. It's like you try to do your own thing. I'm smart enough, I'll figure it out. Yeah, I know what the Bible says, but How does that work? Didn't work out too well for me. Probably didn't work out too well for you before you finally started listening, now, did it? So God will finally put an end to this. So let's go to the end. We started in Genesis. We're going to finish up in Revelation. Let's go to Revelation chapter 18, where God puts an end to the pattern once and for all. Really, it can't come fast enough. Revelation 18, verse 1. And after these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. They all thought, down through time, we know what's best. We'll get rich. We'll create utopia. But it all comes to nothing. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. So God will put an end to that once and for all. But in the meantime, when all of this is happening, what is the admonition given to God's people? Come out of her, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. Come out. You don't have the same mindset that the world has. They're going to go their own way. They're going to solve their own problems. They've got all the answers. We are not supposed to fall into that same rut. We're not supposed to suffer the same consequences as they do. We do not know better than God. We will not successfully choose right and wrong for ourselves. We will not save ourselves. No one will. Perfection is not humanly possible. Man's utopia is just not coming. Is not around the corner, as some would like you to believe. It is, like I said in the beginning, it is no place. It does not exist because man can't do that. I can't do that. You can't do that for yourself. The new heavens and the new earth described in Revelation 21 and 22, that's the real utopia. And what is that described as? Revelation 21, verses 4 through 6. It says, God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, no crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. And then he who sat on the throne said, now listen to this, and compare this to what man usually says. God says, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. It's not like Nebuchadnezzar says, Look at me. Look what I've done. It's God. Look what God does. Look what God will do. Look where God leads. God will do this, not man. Don't look to what they're doing out there. They're not going to save themselves. In here, what's our job? What's our job? It's don't be like the world. Don't go your own way. Listen to God. In the Gospels, when the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and he says, What should I do to inherit eternal life? What does he tell him? Keep the commandments and give up what you have to follow me. That's what we do. We obey and we follow. So I hope as we draw closer to the end, we just need to remember those things. Don't try to do it your own way. Man does not have the answers. They're not teaching the answers in the schools. They're not discussing the answers in Congress. They're not solving the world's problems in their conferences in Davos or wherever, the G8, the G12, the whatever. God has the answers if we obey him and follow him.